here, and I'd like to now turn it over to our newly elected chairman again for a 2-year term, Dan Garton.
I'd like to add my welcome to Rogers, and before I get started, I just want to tip my hat to the RAA team. You know, I just never ceases to amaze me how much this very small team can accomplish, and I think it's a great reflection, actually, of on the regional industry, because we are often like the little train who thinks he can going up that hill with small teams accomplishing so much, and I think that is also true for the RAA team. So Roger, it's a great job here. Quite a convention, great location, and I can't wait for Montreal. I have 11 slides, so this isn't going to take all that long. Roger called it candid. It is that. I don't know if it really qualifies as exclusive, but I hope it's interesting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the change in the industry and sort of the many successes that we have had. Very sophisticated industry as it has matured over the last decade. Then I will talk about the challenges, and then I'm going to suggest at the end my confidence that we'll overcome those challenges. So first of all, we have some wonderful facts that you're often seeing or hearing when you're at this convention, but I think they are truly stunning. 75% of the cities in the US only have regional airline service. And I've often thought this is actually one of our greatest points of leverage or power in our lobbying efforts, because this is truly an extraordinary service for these smaller communities. 51% of the departures are managed by a regional airline. 1 out of every 4 passengers is flown on a regional airline. And the size of that industry has doubled since the year 2000. And we match the safety programs and resources of all the mainline carriers as well. So this is truly a tremendous statement, or 5 statements about the industry. It also, as I said, it's also matured in a very sophisticated manner. This slide starts at 2002 and shows an industry that at that point was comprised of largely small independent carriers, non-public, privately held carriers. Those are the ones in red, and then 53% being wholly owned subsidiaries of mainline carriers, and just a small percentage actually publicly held companies. And then you fast forward into 2011, you see the change where almost 2/3 are now publicly held companies. So really a dramatic shift in the ownership structure, and I think also the sophistication of this industry. And we've made great progress in terms of our operation. This first slide looks at our completion factor and shows a nice trend upward, especially in the last year. You look at on-time performance, that has also increased nicely, especially again in 2012. And then going the other direction are our baggage mishandlings. So it's an industry that has evolved into a much better operation, more sophisticated financially, more sophisticated in its operating techniques as well. And we have implemented essentially every element of the safety alphabet soup. I won't go through these, but 100% of the carriers have an ASAP program. 98% use some kind of FOQA, all the way down the line till 85% have proficiency-based training for their crews. So a lot of safety embedded in the regional industry. I'm very impressed personally by the Eagle Safety Program. When I meet with them and I understand how we use the data from many of these programs to understand in advance trends that could become safety problems, as opposed to looking back at an incident. But we do have some challenges. And it isn't just sort of one isolated issue. I think as you look at our industry, there are different problems for different airlines. And it creates, in many cases, challenges for us. Some are similar, some are different. And I'm going to spend a couple of minutes looking at those challenges. Certainly one of the greatest challenges is simply in terms of profitability. This is a very discouraging trend that starts in 2002 and slopes down to the first quarter of 2012, where the publicly reporting carriers netted a loss between the group of them. And I'm sure for the private or the wholly owned carriers, the numbers might be different, but I would be surprised if the trend wasn't similar to this. And I think this is a huge statement. If you look at the first 5 slides and you see the growth in the industry, the operational sophistication, the safety programs, et cetera, I think this is a trend that simply, obviously, we cannot continue. So the good news is that I have an MBA. And so I studied that problem in great detail, and I've actually found a way to fix the regional profitability problem. And I'm sure all the finance guys in the room will want to take note of this, because these will be some great insights. So there are two ways to do that. One, you have to have more revenue, or two, you can reduce your costs. And I've been instructed by our attorney that that is all I can say on those two topics. So another one of our challenges is actually looking forward at our fleet. This looks backward at the fleet, and what you see is very rapid growth over this period of time. Tremendous growth during the sort of late 90s into the early 2000s. And we were all here. We saw that explosive increase in RJs, particularly 50-seat RJs at that time. But now when we look back or look at our fleets today, we know those airplanes are getting older. It's hard to believe that. It's troubling when you can remember back so well to the first flight of the RJ, and now people are beginning to describe it as an aging aircraft. I think it's actually kind of scary. Someday someone's going to call me grandfather, and that's going to be more scary. But that's one of the issues. The second thing is, we know they are, we know that these airplanes are very fuel efficient on a per departure basis, but they aren't on a per seat basis, particularly the smaller aircraft. And now where it appears that $90 a barrel is a good deal for oil and $100 is quite common, we realize that that cost per seat in terms of fuel is an issue for us. It's an aging, smaller fleet, and when we look at the replacements, there aren't a lot of smaller, especially jet aircraft available as replacements. So I think what that means is that the replacements will most likely be larger aircraft. When you go around and you see a lot of the aircraft booths here, you'll note that the airplanes they manufacture are generally larger. There aren't a lot of 50-seat jets being manufactured today. With that bigger airplane comes a bigger sticker price. And so when this replacement need becomes extreme, we're talking a very big task for the regional airlines or for those of the people in the room that support it, and a lot of financing. Because the last time I looked, I do not believe the regional airlines are going to be paying cash for all these airplanes. So this requirement of replacing that fleet is going to be a big deal during the next decade. I don't want to take any of the thunder out of the next panel that's going to talk about pilot supply and demand, but I simply wanted to get my 2 cents in the way that I have tried to look at this. This is a relatively simplistic view of the situation, but it at least is the way that I have framed the challenge. What this chart tries to look at is the incremental demand that's going to be caused by the new duty and rest requirements in late 2013. So the first chart are the mainline carriers, where we show about 50,000 pilots in the 17 mainline carriers. Then I've used an estimate of an 8% increase caused by the duty and rest rules, driving an increase of a little more than 4,000 pilots for the mainline carriers. There are pilots on furlough. Some of them are flying over in Asia. Some are simply in the US still. I've assumed for this purpose that half of those pilots come back to the mainline carriers when that demand arises. But that still leaves a mainline demand, an incremental demand of about 3,000. I just want to stop and talk about incremental. At this time, the age 65 rule will have been lapped, and we will begin to experience normal attrition as well. So what I'm trying to describe here isn't sort of ongoing pilot demand. This is incremental to what it has been essentially ever. So that's a one-time requirement of 3,000 more pilots. Then you shift down to the regional industry, where we have 16,000 pilots. Use that same 8% increase, driving about 1,300 more pilots for us. Plus, and again, this is simplistic, I've assumed that all the mainline demand is met by the regionals. 3,000 pilots from that top grid are now sucked up from the regional carriers into the mainline, driving a total incremental demand for the regional industry of more than 4,000 pilots. That's 25% of our existing pilot workforce. So for every regional airline, you could imagine that suddenly you'll have a requirement to hire 25% of your staff due to this one issue. That's the demand phenomenon. On the supply side, for those of us who are active hiring in the last few years, it hasn't been easy already. Pilot supply is already somewhat tight. And now we'll add on to it the 1,500-hour rule in January of 2014. Last year, the RAA did a survey and asked their members how many hours the pilots had who had been hired in the first, I think, 9 months of 2011. 46% of those pilots had less than 1,500 hours. And so, to me, it's sort of impossible to imagine how that's all going to work out. And people have asked, where will the shortfall be felt? Because I think it will. Service will be reduced to smaller communities. But it's almost impossible to predict where, at least right now, because you don't know which regional airline will fall short of pilots, because there will be robbing from Peter to pay Paul during this time. And then even once that shortage is recognized at any regional airline, the actual market is in many cases either decided by or influenced by the relationship with a mainline carrier. So hard to know where it will be felt, but for me, almost impossible to imagine that it won't have consequences to service. But there are other key challenges as well. Pardon me. One of those challenges has to do with the relationship the regionals have with our mainline customers. Now, they are our customers, and so we never want to say anything bad about them, either individually or as a group, but I don't think it takes a real sort of Sherlock Holmes to sort out that sometimes those relationships aren't very smooth. If you read the public carriers' 10Ks and 10Qs, you will often read about some stress in that relationship. And when financial conditions are as they are, labor relations often become a little more stressed as well. The aging aircraft I've described, obviously causing escalation in maintenance costs. And then I will never say our oversight from the government is bad. I will just say there's a lot of government oversight. We've listed here all of the agencies who on any given day can have some influence and exercise some amount of auditing or control over the operation. And I think for all of us in the business, we know this is a lot of oversight for us. But I think the industry will get through all this. We will get through the financials, we will get through the fleet, we'll get through those other challenges. And I have that confidence because we have proven that it is an industry which is resilient and quick to respond. If you look over the history of the regional business, I think these two capabilities are very obvious. Even while there was that rapid consolidation, when the many smaller airlines consolidated into a few larger airlines, there is still a tremendous entrepreneurial spirit. And so when you think of the ability to sort of survive through the kind of experience that I'm talking about, I think that helps a lot. And we are an industry that's managed change, ongoing change, whether it is our aircraft, going from all propeller-driven to predominantly jet-driven aircraft, changes in our network dynamics. I used to be the president of Eagle, and our longest flight was about 200 miles. Now we average 400 miles and fly flights to 600 and 700, 1,000 miles. And even the business model. I think all of us know that we've transitioned to largely fee per departure capacity arrangements compared to prorate agreements, and we've managed through that change. So it feels like an industry that has been able to weather change continually, should be able to persevere through this. And I wrap it up by saying, where there's a will, there's a way, and the regional industry clearly has a will. That's it. Thank you very much. Hope you have a great rest of the conference.